just a little more here. Get out of New York. Route 24 followed the interstate south like a poor relation. They turned off the highway onto an asphalt county road, which followed an almost dry riverbed through the notch into a narrow valley surrounded by steep hills and even steeper mountains. Shangri-La, thought Clay. The mountains looked impassable. The cowboy, Johnny, wore a stained gray felt genuine Stetson, which he took off every 30 seconds or so to scratch his bald head. He talked the whole way about how to make coffee, what wood was best for heat, for cash, for convenience, how to wash clothes cowboy style by putting them in a drum in the back of a pickup with soap and water and letting the road wash them. There was such a drum in the back of the Chevy. The little woman takes hers to town, of course. His wife's name was Brenda. They turned off the county road onto a gravel road that wound up into the hills. The truck kept popping out a second. The gravel gave out at a mailbox in front of a neat little manufactured home, like a trailer without wheels, like Ruth Ann's house, Clay thought. A horse peered out of a new pole barn behind it. A dirt road led on up the hill through the low trees toward a big rock that looked like a bad tooth. Rhodes is up there, Johnny said. Rhodes in his rockers. I'd take you, but it's Huntley Brinkley time. He had a color TV. Clay walked up the steep two-rut dirt road between low pinions that looked rootless, like 2/3 scale cartoon trees. He rounded a turn into a meadow and saw a small settlement on the edge of a deep arroyo, 2 VW buses and a wall tent, and a ratty-looking hogan built out of slab and cellotex. Several hippies, all guys, were sitting around a campfire, stirring a pot with a long spoon, one wave. Clay was approaching them when the blanket door of the hogan opened, and a tall man with short hair and a long beard came out. He was older than the others, in his 30s at least, carrying a rifle crooked in his arm like a trapper, a Winchester 30-30, a cowboy model. He wore greasy leather pants. Was he one of the people Clay had met in New York? They all looked the same. Looking for something? Hello, Clay set down his bag. Is Rhodes around? Not exactly. He used his hand to point, wiping it first on his leather pants. He's on up the hill, at the rocks. The rock? At the rockers. Rockers? On the other side of that big rock. He rolled a cigarette badly, fat in the middle, sharp on the ends. Clay gave him a light. Good man, Rhodes, he said. A girl came out of the hogan and clung to his side. She looked about 14. She wore a long scarf like a sari and men's underpants, and that was all. Just a half mile. Unless you want to stay here. Everybody's welcome here. Thanks, said Clay, picking up his bag. Rhodes is expecting me, though. Rhodes is always expecting somebody. He's a good man. Tell him Yosemite Sam said so. It was almost dark. The road got steeper. Clay trudged on around a 3-story rock that would have justified a state park in Kentucky and saw lights. They seemed far away at first until he adjusted his perspective. Then there it was, as if it had just landed from outer space, lighted dimly from inside, a huge dome, 30 feet high, covered with plywood, with a long arc of windows near the top. It looked like something from Arthur C. Clarke, a space station that had fluttered and fallen to earth like a leaf. Dim as it was, the light helped as Clay picked his way over scattered boards between 2 trucks, a pickup and a van. A wide board stairway led up to an arc-shaped deck, all of new-smelling wood. Klaatu bara nikto, he muttered. There was a heavy triangular door. Clay studied it, trying to figure out where to knock, when it swung open on its own. Long-haired people, 3 women and 4 men, one very short and one very tall, all turned to look at him. There was the sweet smell of pot, and the tall one was Rhodes, standing and holding the rope that opened the door, gray-haired but beardless like a boy. Just the man I was looking for, he said, long in the arms, outstretched. The next morning, Rhodes gave Clay 2 eggs with his pancakes. Everybody else got 1. Then he held out his hand. 2 tabs of acid were nestled in his palm. You missed the solstice peyote meeting, he said. This will get you up to speed. Take and eat. Clay took and ate. Now let you and me go for a walk. A path behind the dome led up the mountain, through the rocks, between tiny trees. The acid was lighting up the back of Clay's throat, just barely. They emerged from the pinyons into the upper meadow, and already the dry buffalo grass looked green, dancing. I suspect you're on the run, Rhodes said. Not exactly. Clay had told Rhodes what had happened in New York, most of it anyway. He had left out the FBI. But that's okay, said Rhodes. You were on the run when I met you. You were just a teenager, but you were already on the run. I was? So what are you going to do now? I'm doing it, I guess. Following you, up the mountain. Good for you. The path followed Johnny's pipeline right up the middle of the meadow. It was not so much a path as a trail, connecting the raw spots where the buried pipeline had been dug up and repaired, and the green spots where the plants fed on the seep in the summer. The plants were big. Soon it would be time to haul them inside, according to Rhodes. He crushed a bud between his fingers and held it up to Clay's nose. It was a rich smell like ripe tobacco, like green wax. Like money, Clay said. Rhodes shook his head. Like wealth, not money. We give it away to the world, he said. The world gives back. The world. Clay nodded. The world nodded back, up and down. The acid was definitely coming on. Come on, let's walk. The pipeline gave out of a stock tank fed by a dripping half-inch pipe that emerged from a low rock ledge. Beyond the ledge, the woods were made up of thick ponderosa instead of cedar and pinyon. Rhodes was undressing. Clay rolled a cigarette and watched as Rhodes got in, shivering comically as his butt hit the cold water. Aren't you sitting in our drinking water? If it was a creek, it'd be the same. Get in. Clay stripped down and stepped in. Sit down. Clay sat down. The water made room. Over the edge of the stock tank, Clay could see all the way through the pass to the long reach of the plains, impossibly flat and impossibly empty. He ran his hands along the horizon, smoothing it further. I can see all the way to Kansas, he said. Rhodes laughed. That means you're not in Kansas anymore. Let me ask you a question, serious question. Okay? Do you want to spend the rest of your life tearing down the old world, or do you want to spend it living in the new one? Let me think about it, Clay said, even though he knew, or thought he knew, the answer. One more little piece and then you know where we're going. Denver is mean, said Mary. They had missed their new gig at the Club Cowboy, turned back by a checkpoint just north of Castle Rock. Denver was now under military emergency, which meant that no sticker could penetrate. The fighting, which had begun at the abandoned Greyhound station, had spread outward in concentric circles, like ripples from a rock thrown into a pond. Fighting in New York, too. The Puerto Ricans were blamed. They had added insult to injury, applying for separate representation under the UN's new post-colonial mandate, then welcoming Che to San Juan in the largest public demonstration since the Nationalists were released, even as refugees were flooding into Miami. My father-in-law was Puerto Rican, said Rotella. I never knew you were married. For a few weeks in Albuquerque, hand me your 3/4 inch wrench. They were finally assembling the 40 horse, fitting the recycled heads onto the salvaged jugs. Puerto Rican in New Mexico? Why not, said Rotella. No reason, said Clay, who had always thought that the Puerto Ricans were like the Jews, New York City their briar patch. But even that was changing, according to Palomino, who had had a card from Cicero. The refugees from Israel were all heading straight for Texas or LA. New York was all blue helmets. Atlanta, too. Lowell was back. How was the funeral? Annie asked. We missed you. Some of us, said Dove. The Rockers were sitting on the deck of the Dome, watching the sun go down over Blanca, sharing a six-pack of Walters and a plastic bottle of Cuddy Sar, Lowell's treat, plus sardines for pleas, more pregnant than ever. Funerals are all the same, Lowell said. Boston was mean. Everyone's holding their breath. Did you get to New York at all? Clay wanted to know. Barely. Both the tunnels and the George Washington Bridge were closed for almost a week since the attack on the UN building. The first missile took out a lounge on the 14th floor. 11 died. No one claimed responsibility, but the NYFD was demobilized after refusing to respond, and renegade elements were thought to be responsible for the second missile, fired from Queens, which had missed and taken off the top of the American Prudential Building on 39th and 5th Avenue. The city was now under UN mandate, and blue helmets were everywhere. So does that mean New York City is no longer part of the USA? Clay asked. Never was, said Lowell. Isn't that what we loved about it? Well, that goes far enough.